Hello and welcome to another episode of Podcasts on Fifth Ave. I'm Taylor, you're Danny. We're back after a week off. I went home to Baltimore, so it's my fault. Visited family, saw Taylor Swift in Philly. And when I was there, I mentioned this to you when I was in Baltimore. My parents did send me back with a gift for you.
I still haven't heard anything about this.
Yeah, well, okay, well, if you'd have come to the bar with your friends, you would have gotten it in person, but you had to be a big wet blanket. But it's about 4 pounds of peanut M&Ms, and it says, "For Danny, we're sorry," because they have this idea that I bully you, and you keep getting ratioed on Twitter. So
it's not an idea. You do bully me. Don't try and change the narrative here.
So whenever I see you next, you'll get your peanut M&Ms.
Excellent.
Yeah. So we do have a full episode today. We actually are going to have a guest in the third segment, Wheeling Nailers head coach Derek Army, fresh off a 3-year contract extension. So stay tuned for that. But we actually have a little bit of news to get to first. Penguins GM search continues. And since we've last recorded, we do have some clarity on who the candidates are, who the candidates aren't. We know Kyle Dubas, totally out, removed himself from the conversation. For him, it's either back to Toronto or bust, because he's unsigned. He said if he's not going back to Toronto, he's not going anywhere. But if you look at the various reports that are out there of the candidates who have been linked to the Penguins, some of them we know that they're in the second stage of interviews. We're not sure about some of them. There are about 13 names. Some of them we kind of expected. We've talked about on past episodes. We can just go down the list. One that's kind of popped up recently, John Chayka, former Coyotes GM. This one's a little bit of a, I guess you'd say, surprise, because he hasn't worked anywhere since he bailed on the Coyotes prior to the 2020 playoffs. He does have that kind of like analytics mindset background, forward thinking, like we know Fenway wants, but I'm not crazy about this one. I mean, he was only GM of the Coyotes for 4 years. And they remained pretty average that entire time. They didn't really get better. They made the playoffs in his last year, but he had quit by then, and it was only because of the expanded playoff format. Thoughts on that?
You look at some of the individual moves he made as their general manager, like some of the trades he made, and they're like, in hindsight, they look pretty okay. But he also, like the Coyotes got hit with some penalties from the NHL, and Chayka actually got suspended for a year from the NHL for like doing all kinds of like weird testing on prospects, like pre-draft and everything. And I'm not saying that's necessarily an indictment as of him as a general manager, but that kind of like, I don't know, kind of makes you throw some caution there, I guess. Because like, what do you need like a brain scan for of a prospect to kind of figure out what kind of NHL player they could develop into? With that being said, I don't think he'd necessarily be the worst candidate. Some of the names on this list, I would take him in a heartbeat over them, but definitely would not be at the top of my list.
No, and someone who does have, more of an analytics background, that forward thinking, who we know is on this list, is Eric Tulsky, assistant GM for Carolina. We've talked about him before. He'd be at the top of my list at this point. We know he is in the second stage of interviews. He came pretty close to get the Blackhawks job last year, but then ended up losing out to just an internal hire in Davidson. I mean, I think we're on the same page. You're like, Tulsky, top of your list, right?
Yeah, Tulsky's at the top of mine. And even since we talked about him last time, like even though there's like a lot of information about him out there, it's kind of hard to like actually find stuff like from him that's recent. So I was like doing a little bit of searching, and I went on YouTube and found a presentation he did at some analytics conference, and he was going through like certain decision-making processes and all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that really stood out to me is during his presentation, and he was with the Hurricanes at this time, like the foundation of the presentation that he made was like breaking down a specific football play and like, how do you assign blame and who gets the credit here and what's going on. And he basically got to the conclusion, it's like, well, from the outside, you can't really do that without all the necessary information. So I really liked the way that he was thinking about that, but I also thought it showed his versatility, that, hey, he's proving his point here on a larger basis with something that's not necessarily up his alley.
Yeah, he has a very interesting background. Like, doesn't he have like a PhD in like biomedical engineering? He has like a science background, and he worked in
Yeah.
like tech and that kind of stuff. But he just got into like hockey analytics on the side, and like was like writing that kind of stuff. And then I mean, he's been with the Hurricanes for 8 years, so it's not like he doesn't have experience. So yeah,
Yeah,
he's a top one.
there's been some like weird comments I've seen about like there are some people who view him as like purely as like a spreadsheet warrior and like some like numbers geek. And I'm like, well, that may be true, but like as you just said, he's been with the Hurricanes forever. Like he's a hockey guy.
Yeah. Another name, Matthew Darsh. He is in the second stage of interviews. He had a long career, but he played in the NHL from 2012, more of a minor league guy. He only played 250 games in the NHL. This is his first year as assistant GM with the Lightning. He had been Tampa's director of hockey operations since 2018, so he was around for the back-to-back cups. And as director of hockey operations, he was involved in like analytics, player development, and contract negotiations. He's another name who was interviewed with a lot of recent GM openings: Chicago, Montreal, Vancouver. He was also on like the NHLPA's negotiating committee during the last lockout. So he's in the second stage of interviews too. That championship experience makes him interesting. He hasn't been an assistant GM for a long time, so I'm not sure if that's a knock on him. What do you think on Darsh?
Yeah, he seems to be another one of those guys that's been trending toward like a GM position or like a president of hockey ops position. I don't really have a whole lot to add from what you said, but I think he's one of the like few candidates that maybe haven't gotten to that level yet, but have kind of been tracking toward it. So I think they could do a lot worse than that.
Yeah. Dan McKinnon is another name in the second stage of interviews. I don't think we hadn't talked about him before. He worked for the Penguins before. He was in the Penguins front office from 2006 to 16. First as a scout, then the director of professional scouting, and then his last 7 years he was the director of player personnel. The last 7 years he's been in the Devils organization, director of player personnel to start. He was promoted to assistant GM and senior VP of hockey ops in 2019. And then the last 2 years, he's also managed the Utica Comets, the Devils' AHL affiliate. I mean, maybe that experience with the Penguins gives him an edge. But I mean, just his involvement in the Devils, like the rise they've taken the past couple of years, that's impressive.
Yeah, but he is one of several Devils front office people that they've spoken to, and also one of several former Penguins executives as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of retreads, but yeah, he is one of 3 members of the Devils front office. But now they're going to hire president of hockey ops, a GM. You figure they're going to want an assistant GM too. They could, if like McKinnon, if he's the GM, maybe one of these other people that they're talking to at the Devils that he works with could come in as assistant GMs. Maybe that's a good thing that they're talking to multiple people from the Devils.
Possibly, but then like, is anybody going to want to make a lateral move from an up and coming team like the Devils to go work for the Penguins? I don't know.
Well, so we can get into the 2 Devils candidate, the people they're talking to now. One of them would be a lateral move if they would be moving to assistant GM. Kate Madigan, she definitely was in the first round of interviews. It's not clear if she's in the second stage. She is assistant GM of the Devils. She's been it's her first season there, but she's been with the Devils since 2017. She was a player information and video assistant before being promoted to director of pro scouting in 2019. And she was director of hockey ops for 2 seasons before being promoted to assistant GM prior to this past season. So for her, I don't think she'd make a lateral move to assistant GM. She was probably interviewing for the head GM job. But the other Devils hockey ops connection is Megan Duggan. Megan Duggan, she's one that does seem maybe more suited to the assistant GM position because she's not an AGM with the Devils. She's only been with the Devils for 2 years as the team's manager of player development. And she does work directly under McKinnon. So she reports to McKinnon. So that might be something that makes sense. Megan Duggan, for people that don't know, she's one of the greatest women's players of all time, former captain of Team USA, 7-time world championship gold medalist. She has a little bit of a Penguins tie. Her wife, Jillian Apps, is the daughter of Sil Apps Jr., who obviously played for the Penguins in the 70s. So that would be cool. But Madigan, I don't think would make a lateral move. But McKinnon, if he's the GM, Duggan, assistant GM, does that make sense to you? It makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me. Honestly, I'd just bring that whole front office over at this point. I've been a fan of what they've been doing over in New Jersey the past several years, and that goes beyond landing a couple of top picks in the draft.
Yeah. Jason Karmanos, speaking of retreads, that would be another one for the Penguins. He was with the Penguins from 2014 until he was fired in 2020. He started out as VP of Hockey Ops for 3 seasons, and then 3 seasons and part of another as assistant GM. After the Penguins, he was with the Sabres as an associate GM for 3 years, and so that's where he is now, and he's also the GM of the Sabres AHL team, the Rochester Americans. Before the Penguins, he was with the Hurricanes for a long time, from 1998 to 2013. Assistant GM there, executive vice president, couple roles. So, I mean, he was obviously around with the Penguins for the back-to-back cups, and part of that Sabres rebuild that has them, on the cusp of returning to the playoffs. So, I mean, he has an impressive resume. I don't know if you'd want someone that's with the Penguins that recently as, like, it would be a retread.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate bringing him in either as president of Hockey Ops or as the general manager. The one thing I think he deserves credit for is wherever he's been, he's done a really good job of, and like I've heard that he was responsible for building out the analytics departments, both with the Penguins and now with the Sabres. And you look like during his time, there was Sam Ventura, and then he ended up nabbing him over in Buffalo as well. And Sam Ventura is probably another guy that we're going to get to here in a second. So maybe we can just lead right into him.
Yeah, we can just get right into Ventura. He was at least in the first round of interviews. We're not sure if he's in the second one. He would obviously be another returnee to the Penguins. He got a start in Hockey Ops at the Penguins in 2015. First, just as a consultant for 2 seasons before being promoted to the director of analytics. In 2020, he was promoted to director of Hockey Ops for the Penguins, and he was only in that role for 1 year before he was poached by the Sabres. With the Sabres, he's the VP of Hockey Strategy and Research, and so this past season was his second year. Another forward-thinking guy. That's really the only, quality we got from Fenway is what they're looking for in a GM, forward-thinking, which is we're all interpreting as like they utilize analytics in their decisions. But yeah, he fits that bill.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Obviously, they did speak. I have to wonder though if Ventura is ready for that kind of role yet.
Mm-hmm.
Not
he might
not
be another
that,
good assistant GM.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that that he wouldn't necessarily be a good GM. I'm just saying individually as a person, I'm not sure that he's entirely ready for that role himself. But it's tough to say. Who knows?
Yeah. A couple of people who have been GMs in the league before. Mark Bergevin, he was at least in the first stage of interviews, not clear if he's made it to the second one. He was the Canadiens GM and executive VP of Hockey Ops from 2012 until he was fired in 2021. They missed the playoff. The Canadiens missed the playoffs 3 of those seasons under Bergevin, 2016, 18, and 19. He finished as runner-up for the GM of the Year twice in 2014 and 2021.
2021 is a laughable nomination for him.
Well, yeah. So after he got fired by Montreal, he wasn't out of a job long. He's been a senior advisor for the Kings for the last season and a half. Obviously, he has a lot of experience. I don't know if it's great experience. How much of his success with the Canadiens was just because he inherited Carey Price. Looking at that run to the final, their Cinderella run in the bubble, how much of that was just because of Carey Price?
Well, yeah, I mean, or just ignoring the fact that was the COVID year. I mean,
yeah.
Come on here. But With that being said, they got to stay away from Bergevin. I wouldn't hire him in any capacity based off his track record as GM. I have heard from somebody close to the team that they have had some relatively serious discussions with him, though there's kind of like an underlying sense that he might be viewed as a better fit for president of hockey operations. And there's also a sense that they might be kicking the tires on him maybe a little more seriously just because he is a close friend of Mario Lemieux. And the idea is that, if Bergevin's there, Lemieux's going to be back in the picture and around way more. But again, I wouldn't be making my front office hirings based off whether or not Mario Lemieux is going to be back in the picture at this point.
Mark Bergevin, he played for the Penguins during those last couple of years leading up to the 04-05 lockout, so the worst possible time for him to be with the Penguins. A couple of years ago, I did like an oral history of that X Generation team, the 03-04 team. Bergevin started out that year. I believe he was traded late in that season, but I was just getting stories from a bunch of guys who played on that team. I didn't talk to Bergevin, but so many players brought up that he was like the prankster on that team. Something he would do is he would take the rookies like clothes and, like during practice and hang them up in Mario's change stall. Because the rookies would be so terrified to go into Mario's change stall to get their clothes back out. So yeah, it's something I heard from a bunch of guys about Bergevin on that team. Bergevin, I mean, you look at his past couple of years when he was in Montreal, he had just had a couple of like pretty dumb decisions. Like the Carl Alsner contract is a big one.
I was just about to bring it up, and then he ends up in the minors immediately.
Yeah, it was a 5-year contract worth just over $23 million total. He played one season in Montreal, but then buried in the minors until he was bought out, and which is just insane. And then you look at, like, I believe it was his last draft when he drafted Logan Mailloux, who he was the one that I don't know if it wasn't a criminal case in Sweden, but there was a sexual misconduct issue. He was supposed to be, a first-round pick coming into that draft, pretty high up in the first round, but then he asked to not be drafted that year because he knew that Mailloux knew that he would get a lot of flack criticism for what happened in Sweden, warranted, and he just sounded like he just wanted a year off to kind of work on himself. I mean, he was suspended because he came back to the OHL. He couldn't play in the OHL until he was cleared. But then Bergevin drafted him anyway in the first round, and that just to me feels like such a bad indictment of his judgment.
I completely agree with you, but here's my other thing, right? So we've seen teams are willing to kind of stick their necks out for guys like that if they're really good players, right? Well, the thing is, Mailloux, right now, he's not tracking toward being an NHLer whatsoever, right? Yeah. And several people in the scouting field whose opinion I really, really respect, they'll tweet about him, especially because a few of them are based out of Montreal. But I'll see them tweeting every once in a while, tweeting out these clips that are of him down in the OHL where he's just doing things that you're like, this guy got drafted, and with the baggage that he carries and the character concerns that this guy has, that Bergevin went out of his way to take him.
Yeah. I'd pass on Bergevin. Another guy with GM experience, Peter Chiarelli. So he was with the Bruins for a long time and won, 06 to 15, won the cup in 2011 with the Bruins. Like that's nice to have that experience, and he was successful under the Bruins, but it's his tenure in Edmonton that, like, I feel like should disqualify him because it was so bad. He came in, he had a rookie Connor McDavid, could not build a team around McDavid. They missed the playoffs. 3 of those. He was only in Edmonton for 4 years. Missed the playoffs in 3 of them. I just have a couple of his like awful moves in those 4 years in Edmonton, trading Taylor Hall to the Devils for Adam Larson.
Right before Taylor Hall won an MVP, mind you.
One for one. He gave Lucic a 7-year, $42 million contract. which feels crazy for Lucic, and then trading Justin Schultz to the Penguins for a 3rd-round pick. And to have Connor McDavid and only be able to make the playoffs in 1 or 4 years, I feel like he was in Boston so long ago. You look at his most recent track record, and it's just not good. He's with the Blues now. He's been with the Blues the last 4 years, 2 years as a senior advisor, and then the last 2 years VP of Hockey Ops. So not like a GM, but I just look at his time in Edmonton and no.
Yeah, I genuinely don't know, because like this isn't the first GM opening where it's like, oh, Shirelli's like in the mix or this team's talked to Shirelli. I genuinely do not know how this guy continues to get interviews. Like I no hyperbole whatsoever. I get that there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we don't know about these people and these candidates. But how in the heck is this guy still getting interviews?
I don't have an answer, and
to your point about McDavid and Draisaitl as well, he had them while they were on their entry-level contracts.
Right? Yeah, so it wasn't even like their massive cap hits were handicapping. Right. He had, I mean, yeah, to give away Schultz for a 3rd-round pick to the Penguins, insane. Anyway, we have 3 more to get through. One is a very interesting one, Cam Lawrence. When I saw this name going on, I mean, I messaged you on, because I'd been off for a couple of days. I was like, is this the Cam Lawrence that's the analytics consultant for the Blue Jackets, or the Cam Lawrence that's the businessman from Vancouver? It's the same guy. He's the CFO of GNC. So he's based in Pittsburgh, originally from Vancouver, worked in finance in Vancouver, in biomedical and tech industries, but the past couple of years he's just into hockey as well. He used to write for the fan blog Canucks Army, like analytics type stuff. Somehow got an analytics like a consultant position with the Panthers first. So he was with the Panthers for a couple of years. He was an amateur scouting consultant from 2015 to 2021. This year is his first year as an analytics consultant for the Blue Jackets. Fenway said that they'd be willing to like look outside of hockey. Now, this guy obviously does have minor roles in hockey front offices recently, but I'd be wary of handing him just the reins of the whole team, given his only background in hockey, writing for fan blog and then a couple like consultant advisor positions.
I'm not going to pretend to be overly in tune with like what's going on in the business world, but I've heard like some very good things about what he did for GNC and like help them like escape bankruptcy or something. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but this is just what I've heard. Like I said, I'm not exactly in tune with what's going on with GNC. But with that being said, this is the kind of guy, I don't know that I'd love him in a GM role, but if they could pluck him maybe to bring him over to the front office, like I think that they would really benefit here too. And obviously they're casting a wide net with these candidates that they're speaking to, clearly from going to Shirelli to Eric Tulsky. But I think it would be great if they could get some diverse, strong opinions in that front office. So Lawrence is a guy I think that maybe they could offer him like a full-time position in that front office. It's not as GM, and I don't know. It's so hard to like speculate on those kind of things though, because it's like, okay, well then who's going to be the GM and who's going to be the president of Hockey Ops? Would they get along well together? It's just so hard. But that's kind of somebody I would be looking at, like, yeah, maybe bring him over and find a spot for him.
Yeah. Two more candidates. Steve Greeley, definitely in the first round of interviews, potentially in the second. No one's totally clear on that. He's been the Stars director of scouting and director of player development for the last 2 seasons. And before that, he was the Sabres assistant GM from 2017 until 2020, until he was fired in that overhaul of the whole Sabres hockey ops department. His experience also includes 2 years as the Rangers assistant director of player personnel, 2 years as the associate head coach of the Boston University men's team, and 7 years in different scouting roles with the Kings, amateur and pro. When he was hired by the Stars, general manager Jim Nill He pointed to Greeley's strong scouting and analytics background, and he said he's shown the ability to research and digest numbers and information that help decision making and that drafting, developing, and signing players. So he has a pretty diverse background and the analytics background that it seems like Fenway really wants. So he seemed like a good possibility.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with Greeley, but from everything that I have heard, sounds like it's right up the alley that they're looking for. So,
yeah. And then last one, another retread, Jason Botterill. No one's super clear on whether or not he was for sure seriously in that first round of interviews. So he might not even be a real candidate, but he was with the Penguins 2007 to 2017 as director of hockey ops for 2 years, assistant GM for 5 seasons, and in those last 3 seasons, he was associate GM. He also managed wilkes-barre during his last 8 years in Pittsburgh. He left the Penguins willingly to take the GM job in Buffalo, fired by the Sabres after 3 seasons. Sabres had a losing record under him, 88, 115, and 30. They never made the playoffs, even though his last year was the expanded format in the 2019-20 season, the restart. The last 3 years, he's been an assistant GM for the Kraken for the last 3 seasons, so helping to build them through the expansion draft and then the team that's now in the playoffs. I don't know how I feel about Botterill. Time in Buffalo wasn't great, but now like you look at the time what was perceived as one of his biggest like misses as a move in Buffalo was trading O'Reilly to the Blues.
It turned out to be a hit.
Yeah, it did. It just playing the long game. They got Vladimir Sobotka back, Patrick Berglund, and Tage Thompson in a first and second round pick. Sobotka and Berglund never worked out for Buffalo, and Tage Thompson got off to a slow start his first year there, and then his second year he missed significant time due to injury. But these past couple of years, I mean, after Botterill's been gone from Buffalo, Tage Thompson has turned out to be, one of like the top forwards really in the NHL, and close to 100-point season this year. So it ended up working out, but at the time it was perceived as a big miss. That Jeff Skinner contract was one I know people have been wary of, but then Jeff Skinner's turned around too.
Yeah, I had him on my awards ballot on the All-Star All NHL team as one of the left wingers. Like he had a phenomenal season this year.
Yeah.
Hindsight has definitely done some favors for Botterill's tenure with the Sabres, like the O'Reilly Thompson trade, as you mentioned. But beyond that, he drafted Rasmus Dahlin, Matthias Samuelsson, Dylan Cousins, and those are all guys who are either stars or key contributors for the Sabres now. So still, with that being said, I feel like I don't know.
He was with the Penguins too recently.
Yeah, I feel like he was with the Penguins too recently, and I don't know how. I hesitate to even say he wouldn't be forward thinking, but I don't know. I'm not doing a very good job of articulating what I'm trying to say right now, but
there's better options.
Yeah, there's better options.
Yeah. My pick would either be Tulsky or McKinnon, and if you bring in McKinnon, also bring in Megan Duggan. I don't know about president of hockey ops. Again, I feel like maybe that goes to someone like Bergevin. If you bring in someone who hasn't been a head GM before, like a Tulsky or McKinnon.
Yeah, I'll place my vote for Tulsky and an honorary mention for Shirey because, man, I would just love how funny that would be.
Yeah.
That would be so funny.
All right. That's it for the candidates. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about what the Penguins do with their first round pick if they do keep it. All right, and we are back. The Penguins have the 14th overall pick in this summer's draft in Nashville. The highest pick they've had since they drafted Derek Pouliot in 2012. And it's supposed to be a pretty deep draft. I think you and I are both in agreement that the best thing to do with this pick is to trade it because you're not going to get a player with this pick who will help them probably while Crosby, Malkin, and Letang are still playing. This is not, yeah.
It's there's no accelerating any rebuild by hanging on to the 14th overall pick. Just as we were talking about with the Oilers and Shirey, they had how many high draft picks and still weren't even making the playoffs. Okay. Yeah. It's no guarantee. And when you have a situation where you have a top 5 player of all time, another generational talent, and then a third superstar who have all played together for as long as they have won as many championships as they have, and are still playing at this elite level this late into their careers. And then last offseason, you basically committed to trying and winning with them until they're toast. You can't turn back on that less or a year later. You just can't. It would be a disservice to them. And, I'm not putting Crosby, Malkin, Letang up there is, the best trio in the NHL at this point. They're not, but they're still good enough to get the job done, especially with the cap hits that Malkin and Letang are playing at now, that if the team around them is decent enough that they can at least make some noise. So that's why, and again, we've talked about their competitive window before too, and yeah, it could go another 2-3 seasons maybe, but do you really want to bank on that? You really should just be operating on we've got to win this thing right now with the season that's in front of us. Well, for the Penguins to do that, they're going to have to spend some assets, and they don't have a ton of them. And that 14th overall pick is probably, maybe aside from Owen Pickering, but I would say Pickering's probably got lower value than this pick right now. Oh, yeah. So of what the organization has, this 14th overall pick is probably the best thing that they can offer in a trade right now.
Yeah, draft picks are like buying a car. Like as soon as you drive it off the lot, it loses value. So Pickering absolutely has lower value than a first round pick. The problem is a lot of fans look at the NHL draft like it's the NFL draft, and that you're going to get someone who's going to be on the team next year. You're not maybe the top 3 picks could be in the NHL next year. The problem is if you're drafting out of juniors, they can't even go down to the AHL until they're 20 years old. So it's either juniors or back to the NHL. And it would be very rare to get a junior player this low in the first round who can go right to the NHL. Same with college players. If you get a college player here, most of them are going to go to college for 1 or 2 years.
Heck, Owen Power was the number 1 overall pick, and he went and played another season in Michigan, and then joined the Sabres for a handful of games at the end of the season.
Yeah, a lot of European players. A European player would be maybe your best bet if you want to bring them over, but even some of them just aren't ready. And if you're drafting out of Russia, a lot of them are under contract in Russia and can't get out of that. So it's not people are tweeting and being like, are there any goalies in the mid first round that could the Penguins could get? It's you're not gonna get
definitely not a goalie.
Yeah, the Penguins should not be drafting any goalies at all with Marshall and Blomqvist in the system, and Gauthier. We'll talk about Gauthier next segment too, but so yeah, they should trade the pick. But anyway, I did a story looking at 6 potential options that the Penguins could pick if they do keep that pick. None of these guys are going to be in the NHL next year. Don't get your hopes up. Once you get this far in the draft, it's kind of a crapshoot. You'll see guys fall that shouldn't fall, and guys get drafted higher. I do one of these every year with the Penguins, first pick in the draft. Last year, I picked maybe 6-8 options for the Penguins in the first round. I didn't have Pickering on my list. The last time they had a first round pick with Poulin, I did have Poulin on my list, so. It's just hard to. This is not the NFL. That's a problem. Fans look at the NFL. You can predict deep into the draft. With the NHL, you can't even predict beyond people. Shane Wright fell to 4 last year.
Yeah.
Okay, and because it's the NHL, you're not drafting by a positional need. You're not the Penguins could use a center, so you draft a center. You really just take the best asset.
Yeah, because you have no idea what's going to happen to their center depth in the 4 or 5 years it's going to be until that player gets to the NHL.
Yeah, even if you're looking at the Penguins prospect pool could use a right-handed defenseman. By the time this prospect goes pro, they might have a bunch of right-handed defensemen that they get in other avenues, like college free agents and other draft picks. So you don't draft by need. You don't pay attention to any of that. Just quick going down the list I have because we're running long on this episode. Axel Sandin Pelika, defenseman out of Sweden. He plays for Skellefteå. He is a right-handed defenseman, 5'11", 176. Also, if we're talking about the differences between the NFL and the NHL and how difficult it is to rank, the NHL does not even rank European prospects and NHL and North American prospects in the same list. They have a list of North American skaters, North American goalies, European skaters, European goalies. Does that make any sense to you? If you can rank a kid in the KHL against a kid in the Swiss second league, and then I feel like you can compare them to a kid major junior in Canada. The NHL disagrees. But
I think part of the problem with that, and not to diminish the work that scouts do, but like when you have so many prospects to evaluate, a lot of the time you just fall back on like the box score stats, and like then that's where the problem, like, oh, you don't want to compare leagues that are, you know, guys playing against men versus the junior leagues and all that. At the end of the day, though, the scouting has got to be about the individual skills here and the individual skills and the projectability of them. But anyway, we can get into the rest of
it. Sandin Pellikka, he split the season between his team's Swedish Hockey League team, so the top league in Sweden, and the U20 junior team. This is always a benefit when you draft a kid out of Europe, is that they do have the opportunity to play against like grown men. Whereas if you draft an 18-year-old, they're going to be out of juniors. They're going to be playing against teenagers for a couple of years. The website Dabber Prospects describes him as a mobile, offensive-minded blue liner who likes to activate into the offensive zone, plays with energy on both sides of the puck, and has the potential to become a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. And he has the speed and mobility to make him a good power play quarterback. That's what he's doing in Sweden. Chips in offensively himself with a one-timer in the power play a lot. If there's a knock on him, it says need to improve on the defensive side of the puck, but that's not uncommon for a defenseman his age, I feel like, especially coming from some European leagues. Yeah. So that's him. His contract in Sweden runs through the 24-25 season, so he's not someone that we would even be able to bring over to Wilkes-Barre like next year. So that's a knock. But again, you're not going to get anyone who's going to be that ready. Moving
Incredible
on.
Name, though.
Yeah. The Pittsburgh radio people and feed writers who struggle with the names would not be. There are people that Legare, which is a relatively simple name. So that is a knock on it. Moving on, a center from Moose Jaw Warriors, Braden Yeager, 5'11", 166 pounds. All of these kids are going to need to put on weight. That's just how they are. If you find like a kid who can play well and move well, and there's something like 190, 200 pounds, that's like a unicorn. They're 18 years old. So yeah, everyone needs to put on weight.
Those guys get drafted in the top 5 picks.
Yeah. Yeager, he's the number 11 North American skater. Again, you don't really draft by positional need, but the Penguins could use a strong center in the prospect pool because there really aren't many. So that would just be a plus. But again, you don't go after a center intentionally. Potential to develop into a solid 2-way center, ability to play in the power play and penalty kill. This is his second full season in the WHL, 28 goals, 50 assists in 67 games. That was number 2 on scoring on Moose Jaw, behind only 2022 second-round pick Jagger Firkus. You want to talk about names? Jagger Firkus.
The 2022 NHL drafts had some phenomenal names.
Yeager, he won the CHL Rookie of the Year, which is the way because the CHL is the league that has the OHL, QMJHL, WHL. So all those leagues have their own their Rookie of the Year, and then the CHL picks one among those. It's a pretty prestigious award. You look at the last 4 CHL Rookie of the Year winners before Yeager. It was Shane Wright, Quentin Byfield, Alexi Lafreniere, Nico Hischier. The one before that was Alex Nylander. So they don't always turn into superstars, but pretty good list. Every scouting website points to his shot as his greatest asset good puck handler, puck mover, great mobility, stick handling.
I've got him at the top of my of the guys we're going through. Like he's got to be at the top for me.
Yeah. Let's see. We're gonna rapid fire through these because we have Derek Green coming in a few minutes. Nate Danielson, center Brandon Wheat Kings, another good two-way center from the WHL. Let's see. If anyone wants to find this article on the website, I have highlights and everything. Strong shot, goal scoring upside, good at setting up his teammates, good playmaker. One of his bigger strengths is his skating and his pure speed and mobility. And at 6'2", 185 pounds, he has pretty good size and strength for a guy like this. Let me see. Okay. David Reinbacher, defenseman out of the Swiss National League, the NL. That's his top Swiss league. He defenseman, right-handed. Number 5 European skater. He's Austrian, playing in the Swiss league, playing top minutes over there. That's the thing. When you're playing in a low-level league like this, you're in. He's playing like top pairing minutes, and he's doing well. Reinbacher, 3 goals and 19 assists to finish in 46 games to finish number 2 on his team is Cloton. I think that's how you say it in scoring. And finished number 2 on the team overall with a +7 rating. And he played for Austria in the World Junior Championship. Did pretty well with them too. Elite Prospects says Reinbacher is a force in transition, active in all 3 zones, proficient at generating defensive stops. He's a powerful, agile skater. But where he stands out is his commitment and ability to read the play and then react as a quality defensive defenseman. He's the kind of defenseman that you pair with an offensive defenseman to be that kind of steady, reliable presence. Now, if you want to get someone over as soon as possible, he's not signed anywhere through next season. So, and because he's European, you're drafting him out of Europe. He can play in the AHL before he's 20. And yeah, he's not committed to staying in the Swiss league for next year. So even if he doesn't come to North America, the Penguins could kind of control where he goes. Maybe you get him loaned to like a Swedish hockey league team so he can move up. So that would be intriguing about him. Let's see, Matthew Wood, University of Connecticut, right wing, number 4 North American skater. He was the youngest player in college hockey this season. He was playing in the BCHL in 21-22. He was supposed to go. He was supposed to wait another year and then go to college. But he was just so good in the BCHL that UConn brought him in early, and then he led UConn in scoring with 11 goals, 23 assists in 35 games. The player comparisons you see, everyone compares him to Tage Thompson, style-wise, but then also because they both went to UConn.
Yeah, real convenient.
Yeah, so their skating style is what like Central Scouting compares him to Tage Thompson like the most. Quote from David Gregory, NHL's Central Scouting senior manager. Both of them are not going to look like the Energizer Bunny, having that quick twitch, but they've got the longer stride. Matthew thinks the game well. He's got good edges. I think the power and strength will come. Matthew Wood, his favorite player growing up, Evgeny Malkin. He wears number 71 for Gino. Wood did an interview with NHL.com. He said, I grew up loving his game. I'm Malkin. He's big and skilled, and he competes really hard, so that's definitely one guy that's my favorite player. A guy like Mikko Rantanen is also fun to watch. He's super smart, skilled, big, can score from anywhere. I mean, Matthew Wood is one of those ones that has the size at his age already, 6'4", 193. If he is around, and so people are, why would he be there? His overall speed is something that needs work, and then his two-way game. So if Wood's around, I would take him.
I don't necessarily expect him to be there. If he is, like it's kind of like a toss-up for me between him and Jaeger. But I would stay away from taking a defenseman here. Take a forward. Like we're talking about like a defenseman who you already know you're gonna have to pair him with an offensive guy. You can trade for those guys. You can sign them. Don't draft one.
Okay.
Don't
and
draft
then
him.
one
trade
more.
the pick. Trade the pick.
Trade the pick. One more, Gabriel Perreault, right wing from the US National Team Development Program, 5'11", 165. So again, he's put on weight. He's the number 10 North American skater. He projects as a future top 6 swinger. This season, he broke the single season scoring record for the U.S. National Team Development Program, 53 goals, 79 assists, 63 games. Only one of 4 players to ever break the 100-point mark in a single season for the program, joining Austin Matthews, Cole Caulfield, Jack Hughes. Dobber Prospect says, heading to the year, he was seen as more of a playmaker down the road, but he's quickly shown that he's also a talented finisher. His biggest weakness right now is he needs to put on weight, obviously. And then his speed and defensive game also needs work. His father, Yannick, played 14 seasons in the NHL with the Leafs, Kings, Canadiens, Predators, Coyotes, Blackhawks. So that's him. We got to wrap this segment up. We're in agreement. Trade the pick. If not,
trade the pick.
Matthew Wood if he's there. If not, Jaeger. Not just because he kind of sounds like Jaeger, but that's it for this segment. We're going to wrap it up. Stay with us. We got Derek Army coming on. Should be a fun interview. So stick with us. All right, and welcome back. As promised, we do have a guest this week. We are joined by Derek Army, head coach of the Wheeling Nailers. Derek, thanks for joining us. And I was telling you the other day, you're now our most repeated guest on our podcast on the network. This is your 3rd appearance, surpassing JD Forrest. So just how much of an honor is that?
That's a big honor. JD obviously is a unbelievable guy, so to be ahead of him, I guess, is always nice. If there was a shirt, hey, that's top notch. But maybe that's a 4-time appearance. Yeah.
So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on this week is you did just sign a contract extension to stay head coach of the Nailers for the next 3 seasons. Just, congrats on that, and just feeling like having that security and that vote of confidence in your job.
Yeah, it's obviously great to have the security of 3 years. One being just that I have family and whatnot, but also just the fact that the kind of the plan that I have down here is just shared vision, and it's not just a vision within Wheeling, but it's a shared vision within Pittsburgh. And I think that's the thing that matters most, is that it's a cooperative thing between Wheeling and Pittsburgh to extend me, and it's one that I'm very blessed and fortunate to have gotten this opportunity, and now trying to make the most of it and, kind of keep producing. My goal is to have a player play for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And that's when I know I'm, someone who came through here that's when I know I've done, my job right. And, but no, I couldn't be more excited to just be back in Wheeling. I love it here. My family loves it here. So it's one of those things where pride is still to win a Kelly Cup, and, that'll be the mission.
Yeah. What, Danny, you want to go?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Derek, you've gotten some really rave reviews for the job that you've done there in a relatively short amount of time. Just what do you attribute that to?
I think just my time in the organization prior to, for me, I always look at, and I try to tell people is, the teams I was on, my first year was 14, 15. And in my time, the guys that I saw come through were Casey DeSmith, Tom Kuhnackel, Carter Rowney, Josh Archibald, and then separate NHLers in JSD, Morgan Ellis, Mike Condon. So that span, even to this day in the ECHL, for any team is no one did that. And I look at what we had is, I think the 15-16 year, the Penguins obviously won the Stanley Cup. We lost in the championship in Game 6, and then Wilkes-Barre, I think, finished first in the American League, but maybe got bounced in round 2. But for me, the whole principle was winning was the focus. And I thought when guys were with us, they won. And that's where Tom Kuhnackel, when he came down, I think they told him it was a 1-week stint. And he ended up, sticking for 2 or 3 months, scored a big overtime goal in the playoffs, had to PK, had to do all these things that adapted him to then go to Wilkes to take on the role and then, continue on. So I think the winning aspect in 3 organizations is important. And for me, getting back to that as this is the principal point in development. And, I've seen the success in the numbers for guys we've had in the analytics that I have is guys are developing because they have to play in these situations. And I think it's very important. And I've kind of tried to instill that culture. It's, that's probably the focal point is winning, but also for me, I took pride in Wheeling as it's a hardworking blue collar town. And I took a lot of pride in it as a player and in the community. And I've tried to instill that in the players now here is, be a part of it, be a part of the fans, appreciate what this town is, go out and have lunch, just be seen, because the people here love the Nailers, and they want a community team that loves being in Wheeling. And I think they lost that for a few years, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, for you, just beyond that, what is it about Wheeling? Because the Nailers released, this is going to be your 9th season in Wheeling in total, between coaching and playing, more time than anyone has spent in Wheeling. And I mean, you look at, other ECHL cities. It's not like an Orlando or Cincinnati or Boise or a big town like that. But just what is it about Wheeling that you have that connection with?
Yeah, I think when I left school at Providence College, it was like I didn't think I'd ever find, like, I was like, this is it. This is my end all be all. Like, I don't know how it'll get better. And then I came to Wheeling, and the fans kind of took me in, and I just appreciated the team we had. And I think everyone just was in it together. And it was one of those teams that through all my years there, where it was, you make of it with the players you have, you make of it with the community you have. And I think the community is so supportive. And then within the team, it was, everyone loved, being a part of it. Everyone loved that little grind that, okay, I don't have to be the darling in Fort Myers, Florida, where I'm laying on the beach. I can be in I can be in a cloudy day, leave on a rainy, happy, day and go have a nice bite to eat with my friends. I can have fun. I can make fun with that. I can go to Topgolf. There's things you can do, but it's appreciating that hard work and that, that ability that, like, hey, not everyone's willing to do this, but hey, I am. And I think that was something I appreciated. And then, I've grown to love the city. There's little, nooks and crannies to the restaurants and whatnot, and good places to go in the parks. And my son loves the parks, and we love skating and all these things now that I really, really appreciate with having a family. But those are kind of what drew me in as a player.
Yeah.
Derek, going back to your work on the bench, and I don't mean to compare apples to oranges here by any means, but I for several years after I graduated from high school, it was 2-3 years afterward, I went back and started coaching my high school team. And one of the things that I really struggled with was separating myself as the actual head coach and somebody that wasn't their friend, right? Because we're so close in age. Some of the guys that were on the team knew me from me having played previously. I had a couple buddies whose younger kids or younger brothers were playing on the team. So with you being a relatively young head coach and having been so familiar with the organization, how do you kind of separate that fine line as, I'm the guy in charge here, but also kind of building and still cultivating those relationships?
Yeah, I think, for me, I've been blessed, obviously, having my dad coach since I was, coach over 1,000 NHL games. And so being around it with him, I did have a little bit of an awareness of, just life lessons and lessons along the coaching path that I was able to kind of pick up. And as I got into coaching, I had coaches who were maybe too close on that line to players, and where it was a little uncomfortable even as a player. And as I got to coaching, I actually had to coach 2 former players my first year as an assistant in Worcester. And, I did have many conversations where I was like, hey, listen, yes, I'm your, we were really close before, but this is my job now. And I did learn, we were fired in Worcester, myself and the head coach, Jamie Russell, in my second season. And I kind of learned at that point, not that, because we kind of, I don't want to say chose friends or, chose maybe some favorable connections on the team, like to keep around or make roster moves. And it was kind of a point like, hey, I have a son on the way, and now obviously I have a daughter, but I can't make decisions that I don't think help my family as well. That's the number one thing I have to look out for, is making sure I take care of, my wife and my kids. And so that kind of was a big thing in seeing that as a assistant Worcester, like, hey, there's some decisions maybe we could have made different. And now for me, I do think the hugest part in hockey and any team sport now is with the new age of players is making sure you have a relationship. I want to know who their significant other is. I want to know, where they spend their summers, where they vacation. I want to know these things because I want to know them as individuals. I want them to know myself. I have my son in the locker room all the time. I have my daughter around, and I have my family around. So that relationship is there. And I truly do care about every single player on this team. Now, I do have to separate, there's certain lines I obviously I don't cross. I don't, I know when I'm supposed to joke maybe a little bit too far, and that's, I don't cross it. I know when my line is with these players, and the hard part is, having to trade them or release them or things like that. But thing I built up from the start with him is the honesty. I pride myself on, I'm going to be honest with you, from the second I talk to you until whenever that time comes that it's over, is I'm going to tell you straight up. I'm not going to beat around the bush, and I think they appreciate that honesty, that trust, that they know I have their back and the best interest, and I am going to be upfront with them. And so some of these decisions are hard, but I think they know, hey, listen, it's not one of those that it's a personal thing. This is business sometimes.
Yeah, you were as head coach of the team that brought, Wheeling back to the playoffs for the first time since you were there as a player. This year you fell short. Just can you reflect on this season, maybe what didn't have to make the playoffs this year, and just what needs to change going into next year?
Yeah, for sure. I think the hard part at times with being in Wheeling is you don't typically, get the veterans who live in the area. And for us, I pride myself on moving players on. And for us in the last 2 years, we've had 33 call-ups. We've had countless guys leaving. So unfortunately for us, after that year, we realistically, I think we could have won the Kelly Cup had we, Sam Hood went up to Wilkes-Barre and for us before round 2, and then we didn't get 2 players back who were up. And so I do think we could have won a Kelly Cup, but that's besides the point. So as we got into last year, I think we only returned 8 of our top 10 scorers, and we didn't return our starting goalie. And so right then you're starting behind the 8 ball. I'm not saying, though, the pride is that we had, I think, 3 players sign AHL contracts that didn't have them the year before. We had a guy sign a big deal in Europe or a couple deals in Europe. And so there was some good things that happened, and we moved players on like I wanted to do, but then we had a large gap to fill. And I don't think, because the run we were on, we weren't able to bring in college kids or, some of the younger players to test out. And so we didn't really have that next wave of players waiting in the wind to come up. And I think that was an area where going this summer, that was a focal point, was can we address? And I think maybe I overshot on a couple players that just, I missed what the mark would be for them. And then on top of it, we had some players who we were banking on and had short stints, good or bad. We had Cedric Perry play 9 games and then finished, the entire year with Colorado Eagles. Jostling was up in Wilkes-Barre for extended time. We had Hausinger, so we had a number of players. I hate making excuses. I do believe that no matter who's in my lineup, we will win. And that's the focal point. But it was one that it was a completely new team. And I had a hard time looking at it that way. And so as we got through the season, towards the end, I really think we could have made a playoff push. But I don't think it would have set us up for, I don't think it was a team that could have won the Kelly Cup. And I don't think it was a team that helped us next year. And so for me, it was, okay, well, we need to, shake it up a little bit. We got to find what brings us a championship. We have to find the next crop of players that can come in and help Wilkes. And so that became the focal point at the end, the last 11 days, because we didn't really bring in college players the year before. So, the job was, can we find some players to come in for next season? I think that was, successful in that sense and successful in our call-ups we got up, but, unsuccessful in the outcome.
And just looking at more on the individual level here at some of the players, I believe Josh Maniscalco is a free agent at this point in time. But just where does his kind of game stand right now? It seemed like he was maybe a guy last year that could spend some time up in Wilkes-Barre, maybe on a little bit more of a consistent basis. So just where does his game stand right now? What are some of the strengths that he has to his game, and what does he maybe need to work on a little bit to get up to the AHL on a full-time basis?
Yeah, Manny was a guy who came in and was raw. I think, the thing that hurt Manny was he had 6 games during the COVID year. So he lost a full year of development. And I thought the year last year, 2 years ago, I guess, we poured the roll on him and he got confidence. His thing is he always wants to play. He wants to be offensive. And unfortunately, as you get to the next level, there are going to be guys who can fill that role, who are more destined for that role. Just in general, there's guys in the American League who are the offensive guys, but they can't be the offensive guys in the NHL. So Manny is a guy who has that offensive capability, but didn't quite have the polish defensively, the physicality. And I thought over the 2-year stretch you saw, for me, I analytically, I see his numbers drastically increase. His PK was great. His physicality, his hits, actually, he ended up being second in our D-Corps on hits the year before. And then this year you saw his numbers, chances for and against, completely drop, even out in terms of they were much more chances for. So I had a lot of confidence in his game. And then when he went to Wilkes, I think you see that in his numbers that he played 24 games. He's a plus player, where there was a lot of, down the stretch, there were some minus players. He was a plus player. And so you see he made those adjustments. I thought by the end he was really playing an important role for Wilkes, and I think that's a good sign. The beauty of it for Manny, I think he's 24. And a lot of the college players that come out, they're 24, but do they have 200 plus pro games and playoff experience? No. So I think he's a really valuable piece, and continuing to push his physicality side of things is an area that, I think he works on.
And then another NHL contracted player you had down there, Jordan Frask, obviously behind the 8 ball a bit to start, just injury-wise, getting hurt up here. I think with him, I was a little surprised just that he wasn't putting up maybe the points that we saw. Obviously, he was an overager in junior power play with Shane Wright. Just what did you see from him in Wheeling when maybe the points weren't coming like they were in juniors?
Yeah, no, I think Frasky was, unfortunately, like you said, he had to deal with injuries. He had, he came off a shoulder injury in the actual development camp, and then he had a high ankle sprain in main camp. And all of a sudden, the high ankle sprain is very difficult to come back from. And as a very young player who is coming to a new place, it's not easy. And I thought he was a guy who his game significantly, of all the guys for us this season that showed development, his halfway point, his numbers to the second half drastically changed. And I think that showed, him getting used to the pace, him getting used to all these things within the game. His first half, he maybe was a little step behind, and that has to do with the conditioning and the ankle and all that. But as it got going, you could tell he's playing with more pace. You could tell his faceoffs, which were struggled early, and that happens when you're now playing against men instead of the boys of the OHL. His faceoffs improved as well drastically, and it was one that I think his real development was shown at the end. He was playing 19, 20 minutes. He was playing first line. He was having a match against their top players, and I thought he did a really good job. Now, I'm trying to pull up his conversion rate for you. His chances for and against, he had a lot of great numbers. His conversion rate is where he lacked, and I think that's just because sometimes just unlucky. Like for him, his conversion rate during the season on any chances for and against, he was at 7.41 chances converted. That was our each individual average was 12.5. So it just shows you, his just wasn't going in. And I think sometimes that happens, and it really happened early. His first 20 games, I think he only had 3 points. He started to convert more as he got more confidence. I think it takes time sometimes. And I think we saw it really start to convert for him at the end, and really start to go in and show signs that, hey, he's going to be a player. It takes some time.
And in his brief time in Wilkes-Barre, I was impressed by maybe like his attitude and his fearlessness. I mean, his debut in Wilkes-Barre, I don't know how much of it you saw, but he was trying to like go onto the bench after a shift, and Cale Kessie is blocking his way. Cale Kessie, one of the AHL's top heavyweights, and Frasca just tackles him into the bench. And I talked to him after, and he's like, "Yeah, I wasn't going to let myself be pushed around." And as a rookie, that's
I would agree 100% with that. So we watched that. We had our eyes on that, incident. And then on top of it, for us, we play, I don't know if you guys know a whole lot of it. Fort Wayne for us is they're loaded with heavyweights. They're tough up and down lineup, and they want to come, you want to go play them, and they're going to try and bully you and whatnot. For me, we had some guys who shied away, which is natural. Frasca stopped at the net every single time, took an extra cross check. And that's the thing that, are things you try to teach these players, and he naturally had that confidence. And I think that's a really good sign. Other skills will come, but being that fearless, not being afraid to play against a hard team like that, where a lot of guys are scared, was very impressive.
And just going back to his chances and his conversion rate right there, how tough is it as a head coach to, obviously sports is a results driven business, right? But how tough is it to really balance when you see the process there for a player, but it's just not necessarily clicking? How tough is it to kind of toe that line, and at what point is enough enough?
It's, that is very difficult at times because, I think the hard part is when you're, really in a down to a competition and you got to find a way to, win. And it's like, I need these pucks to go in. We need these pucks to go in. And the player, you have to, for me, I always try to remember, I was a player too, where, it didn't go in. And these guys are trying. Now, little things, I always go back to, something I learned along the lines with Paul Kariya years ago. This isn't, he told me it's through my dad, is that, in drills, he scored every single rep, the puck went in the net. And it was just for him to see, I score every time. And so as I became a player, I tried to do that. And, I am not Paul Kariya, but that's what I try to tell these guys is, listen, believe it's going to go in the net. Go to bed at night thinking 10 minutes, watch yourself score. Watch your highlight reel in practice, see yourself score and work on these little things. And typically what I try to do is run them back through on a scoring chance, run them back through it in a practice, just so they now see themselves scoring on that one-time pass or whatever it may be. But it is one that, for me, can pay off and can't pay off. There's guys who, we had a guy named Cedric DeRousseau who led us in points this year. He had 1 goal and 2 assists through 12 games. And he's playing really top minutes. And his chances for and against, and his numbers for my side showed that it had to go in at some, like it just couldn't not. And I stuck with him, and eventually it obviously cracked, ended up being a 30-goal scorer for us. But then conversely, I won't list the player's name, but we had a couple of players who I continued to go back to, hoping it would go. Now their numbers dictated otherwise. Like they weren't generating the same amount. They had minimal generated opportunities. So for me, I was like, okay, that's when I know it's not necessarily going to go in. I can live with a player who's getting a million chances for and not hurting the team, generating more on our offensive side of things and just not converting. Whereas, it can't be an even number or it can't be dictated into the negatives. And that's where these players, that's when it was time to move on was, hey, you're minus 10, it's continuing to go against us. It's time, unfortunately.
And conversely, I'm sure it's probably tempting when you're seeing like a guy that's scoring, even though the maybe the chance generation numbers aren't there. It's probably tempting to be like, oh, well, maybe like this could keep going a little bit longer, right?
100%. It fools you, and you try to ride the hot hand as much as possible in a case like that. Try and say, maybe it's just this is that one of those miracle runs. Let him go. Is that Tim Tebow, Jeremy Lin type run? Let him go. Whereas now, then eventually when they start to come back to the pack, then you got to step in and coach them again and just say, hey, how can we get more opportunities? Typically, though, I try to stay, if a player's red hot, unless it's something glaring, I try to, say, hey, here's your space. Right now you're feeling good. That's a good thing.
Taylor, are we getting back into some individual players here?
Yeah, we can do that. You want?
Yeah. So another guy I wanted to ask about was Brooklyn Kalmakov. He was up at Penguins development camp last season. Just where is his game at right now, and what are some of your outlooks on him heading into this season?
Yeah, he's a guy who can score. He's a shot first player. I think the thing with a lot of players in today's game is you can't teach scoring. Like you just can't teach goal scoring, and he's the guy who has it. He wants to shoot the puck, and I think it's just some natural evolution in his game in terms of some of the things that he needs to work on defensively. For us, I think the biggest attribute to Cali is looking at his numbers half season, same as Frasca, showed significant development. And for me, that's where I'm very happy with what his year is. His first half, I think he finished minus 15 in 33 games. His second half, he was +2. And his numbers, his chances for against, his in-depth numbers going to the net, blocks, these things all improve. So it's like, okay, he showed that the improvement is there. There's still areas of growth, obviously, to his game to get to the next level, because it is, you're going to start as a fourth line player in the American Hockey League, and then you'll eventually, or third liner, and then you'll get your opportunity. That's what happened with Rowney and Kuhnhackl and some of the players I've played with, around the league. And so for him, though, to show those signs of growth is very important. He's 22 years old, maybe. So, he'd be a sophomore, junior in college now. So lot more growth to be had there. I was very excited to work with him. And I think there's, a bright future for him.
Defenseman Chris Ortiz, second-year pro. He saw a little bit more AHL time this year. Just what kind of steps did you see him take this year?
Yeah, he's a slick puck-moving defenseman, and very smart, elite with his stick, not afraid. Another guy who, he's not a big defenseman, and you would think, maybe he's a little timidness to him. Not at all. He when we play some of the teams, the hard teams, Fort Wayne, Cincinnati, they just try and take liberties at him, and he finds a way to just continue doing his thing and being effective. And he's a guy for us who, can run a power play, is smart in terms of his penalty killing, some of his gaps. Where he'll continue to have to improve is his defensive game and continuing to get stronger, because there are bigger players at the American Hockey League. And you just have to be able to adapt to that and start as a simple player. Wilkes is probably not going to look to him to be the quarterback on the PP in the first pair. So how can you keep it simple and just play a simple 5-6 pairing game to move yourself up? And that's kind of some of the things we worked on. And once again, with him, his numbers over the 2-year span continue to show growth in those areas. His numbers defensively improved. I thought his gaps and stick got continually better. He trusted his feet a lot more, which was great to see.
Yeah.
Then the last guy I wanted to ask you about was Justin Adamo. He's currently at the World Championship right now, potting some goals. Where do you see him going as a player? Because it seems like there's some legitimate upside there.
I honestly see him as an NHL prospect. And I think you can't he's 6'6", 255 pounds. Like, he looks like he should be a tight end. And he is a player who, in college, a lot of his penalty minutes came from being overly physical. His feet obviously need to be improved, but his shot is, I haven't seen a shot like that. It's heavy, and goalies see this shot from a distance, and he just beats him clean. He can't be moved around the net. I do see that he's a prospect. If he continues to develop for us this year, his steps were, he was originally a winger. He started taking faceoffs. And the thing I love most, I watched France-Hungary 2 days ago or yesterday, and he took every important faceoff for Team France. And I thought that was a true attribute to him, learning the craft through the season, forcing himself to learn it. And then his game defensively was really good for us. He was ranked our top forward on the season. And that's just within the analytics side of things. He was very impressive. I thought his speed, although he looks big and can lumber a little, he gets there. He can get going a bit. And I think that's something for him that he can take pride in, is going to Wilkes. And he scored 6 goals in 12 games or something. And it's like, okay, there's something there. And I think it was good to see him get re-signed, because I do honestly believe that, he can kill penalties. He could play the net front of the power play. He's physical. He's learning that side of things a little bit more, the physicality. 6'6", you're probably going to have to, fight. It's just the reality of it. So he's learning that craft. But I was very impressed with him, and he's probably one of the best guys you will meet as an individual. So I'm excited to see where his growth goes.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if he could kind of develop into a guy kind of like Brian Boyle did and carve out a similar role, like you were mentioning, being a bottom 6 guy who's relied on the penalty kill a little bit. But Brian Boyle was a dude who could score goals too.
Yes, 100%. I don't see why not. He's self-made. He had a lot of coaches help him along the way, and then this year he did a lot of growth. His growth in numbers, to me, if he continues growing like this, is very, very promising. I think JD, sinking his teeth into him with, ports and whatnot will be great for him. But yeah, you can't make that size up on a league where you look at teams. What is the biggest, in these NHL playoffs? down the middle, size down the middle, strength down the middle, some size on the back lines are important. And he's a guy who can provide that. And I think that's, a very promising thing, within the organization.
Last guy I wanted to ask about, Taylor Gauthier, first-year pro. You had him at the beginning of the year, came up to Wilkes-Barre, had a great rest of the year. I'd be surprised if you see him again. But did you just see him having this kind of year, when you had him down there, just raw first-year pro?
Yeah, I think, great person, like one of those guys who just a character, like happy, great to talk to. So I think his personality was great in that sense. And then on top of it, he's a competitor. And I love a guy who wants in practice to, takes a shot like it's for the Stanley Cup, because that's that's where this guy's got that extra push for himself. And spent a lot of time with Charles Grant with us, and I imagine Kane Tissey up in Wilkes. But for example, for me, his first game in Wheeling, first pro game, he's going head to head with Kosa, who was the first rounder, the other WHL Red Wings pick. And they're going head to head. And so it's obviously in his head, he's built it up. And unfortunately, he gives up his first 3 goals. He gives up one from behind the net. He turns one over. It's in the back of the net. And I think he'd want all 3 back. There's maybe 3 goals on 4 shots, and you blink. And it's like, oh, tough start to his pro career. Do I get him out of the net? And I'm like, let's see what he's got. And he battled. He didn't give up a goal for the rest of the game. He battled. He came in after. He's like, thanks for not pulling me. I knew I had better, and he gave us a chance to win. And, aside from, he had a little stretch where he had some things going on that he was really good for us. He was elite. He played some high-end games. I could see his future from talking with the goalie, development coaches, that he was a guy that they were thinking, hey, he's going to be something. And I was very happy to see him have success in Wilkes, because he is an unbelievable person.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to ask about, something you've been doing. You've been bringing your son to press conferences. And I know people share the videos whenever you do it. It's the coolest thing. When did you start doing that? Why did you start doing that?
So my little guy's always he's always outside the locker room, loving life, win or lose. And so he's waiting, and now he's just become now he's asking to do the interviews. Typically I told him, I'm like, listen, only when we win, buddy. And then this year, he would get too persistent, so I started just letting him come on. But it was one I think within the community of Wheeling, I want to be around. I want people to get to know myself and my family, and they take care of my wife and my kids up in a lot of people come help her up top, and I'll say this for me, my goal in life, obviously always is was as a boy to win a Stanley Cup. I always wanted to have children and be a dad. That's the thing I love more than anything in the world. And so having my son and my daughter is very important to me. And so now I would have liked to have gotten my daughter in a couple interviews this year. I think next year I'll start to phase her in as well. But as one, I just want them to go through everything with me. I see the life I got to live as a child and being around my dad and getting to see all these players. I want my children to love what their dad does. I want my kids to love the Nailers and love being around hockey. And fortunately, he really does. And he actually learned to skate. He no help the other day, which was was awesome. And I'm truly blessed. So I just want to share. I want to share all these moments with my family, and that's the most important thing. And so if I can share these little interviews with my little guy, that's what I'm going to do.
Has he committed to Providence College yet? Is it really? Fourth generation?
Yeah, I told. I think I talked to my parents right after we were having the son. I'm like, a lot of pressure on this little guy right now, but we'll have to see where he goes. Who knows? It might be my daughter, who's the Providence College hockey player. But no, it will. Somebody's got to carry the flag.
Yeah. Before we let you go, any fun Brandon Tanev memories? I feel like we ask you whenever you're on. For people that don't know, you played with Tanev, line mates at Providence College.
Yes, no, Tanny was something else. It was great to see him have the success he had in Seattle. The blow and the kiss at the fan did not surprise me even in the slightest. But is one that for me he was a guy who worked hard, and I love the fact that he always wanted to battle, always wanted to compete in practice. And and whatnot. So he was a guy who, no matter what, if it was video games or just a Red Sox game on TV, he always was, it was game 7 to him. And he hated Boston sports. I can say that. He would always go at it with everyone about the Red Sox or the Bruins. So yeah, to see his success has been great and very exciting for sure. And same with, give my boy Noel Acciari a shout out as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll have to have you come back on again.
Yeah.
Have you keep your lead over JD in the appearance rankings. But yeah, thanks again for joining us. Congrats on the extension. That's it for this episode of Podcast on Fifth Ave. Thanks everyone for listening. We drop new episodes every Saturday wherever you listen to podcasts, or on the DK Pittsburgh Sports YouTube channel if you want to watch this. But thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next week.